We all need to understand as voters what we are voting for. We are voting for more of the same if we support the Labor government, and it will be worse a second time round, and much worse if Labor is dependent on the Greens to survive in the Parliament.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail.
Welcome to Australia's Future. My name is John Roskam. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs, and I'm talking, as we do on Australia's Future, with former Prime Minister, Distinguished Fellow of the Institute of Public Affairs, Tony Abbott. Welcome.
Thanks, John.
Tony, we're just under 2 weeks from, as you've talked about and as we'll discuss, one of the most consequential elections in Australia's modern history. How is it looking?
Well, this is the most consequential election in my lifetime. I thought the 1975 election was incredibly significant, and it was because Whitlam had badly damaged our economy. He'd massively expanded the size of government, and of course he was in defiance of the Constitution. It was important that the electors vindicate the actions of the Governor-General in upholding the Constitution.
As they did overwhelmingly.
As they did. Today, though, I think the situation is even worse. The Albanese government has been no less economically vandalistic. It has similarly massively increased the size of government. But there's a different culture today. Back then, the Whitlam government seemed like an aberration. Because of the long march of the left through the institutions, the Green left now seems like the new normal. And that's why it's so important that we arrest this slide away from our Anglo-Celtic cultural roots, away from our Judeo-Christian ethical origins. We have to arrest this slide, recommit to the things that have, dare I say it, made this country great. And the best way we can do that is by changing the government as quickly as possible.
So, Tony, I'm going to try and get a headline out of you. I'm going to do my job and say that if we are unable to arrest the slide in a fortnight, can you come back?
Well, John...
Will you come back?
The important thing
Will
is...
you serve the nation, Mr. Abbott?
All Prime Ministers and ex-Prime Ministers desire to serve, but the important thing is to get a Dutton government on the 2nd of May. That's the important thing. We need to win this election. And look, I'm doing everything I humanly can. As you know, I was out a couple of weeks back with your substitute, the wonderful Dan Wild, in Adelaide. Then I was in Perth. Last week I was in Queensland, and we've got some terrific candidates there. I get a very good sense from our campaigns on the ground.
What are they telling you?
Well, I think we've got better candidates in key seats than we've had for a couple of elections. I think we've got more enthusiastic local Liberal parties. We've certainly got more volunteers. And I know the commentariat has been highly critical of our campaign, but particularly in outer metropolitan seats where I've been focusing, people really like the idea that you'll get $14 off every time you fill up your car.
So is this feeling not being reflected in the polls? Is it because the polls are national and you're talking in outer metropolitan marginal seats? What do you think is happening? And then we'll talk about your experience in 2010 and 2013, which is very interesting and important.
Yeah, well, John, look, I think there's the sort of the shy Tory factor in the polls. We've seen that in lots of recent elections across the Anglosphere. I also think that national polls often don't adequately reflect what's happening seat by seat, and we often forget in this presidential election era, we often forget that under a Westminster system, you've got to win an election seat by seat.
It's battle by battle. 149, 150 battles around the country.
Strictly speaking, if you had 50% of the vote and 50% of the seats, i.e. 25% of the total, you could still win an election. Now, it doesn't quite work like that, but as I said, the mood on the ground is strong. The static is difficult, and I guess the fact that there's been so many interruptions to this campaign, the most recent one, of course, being the death of the Pope and the suspension of campaigning out of respect.
Is that a little bit cynical from the Labor Party?
Well, look, he was a good man. We are expected to mourn the dead, as we do. And as I said, he was a good man. So we should mourn his passing.
People talk about 2019 and the so-called miracle victory of Scott Morrison when he was behind in the polls. But as you were just reminding me before we came on air, in 2010 and 2013, we were in a not dissimilar situation and we were coming from opposition. Or I say we, it's the Liberal Party. What happened in 2010 and 2013, and what are the lessons in it for Peter Dutton with less than 2 weeks to go now?
Well, when I think back on the 2010 campaign, John, you're right. The coalition was behind, heavily behind, in every poll, but we still won more seats than the Labor Party. Effectively, we won the election, even though we lost the subsequent negotiation to those two National Party turncoats.
How many seats did you win, just to remind me?
I think it was 7 seats in 2010 and another 18, I think, in 2013. But John, my chief takeouts from the 2010 campaign were first that we had a message, a very strong message, right up to the election that Labor's emissions trading scheme was a great big new tax on everything. And when Kevin Rudd dropped the thing, we said, aha, he hasn't really dropped it. It will come back. And you might remember that in just about every interview in that election, I started off by saying, as sure as night follows day, if this government is re-elected, they will bring back the emissions trading scheme. They will bring back the great big new tax on everything. That prompted eventually Julia Gillard to make her infamous statement, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. And of course there was. So that was one factor in the 2010 campaign. The other factor, I suppose, was that I was determined to let the voting public know that I was completely committed, that this was the most important thing in my life till that point. And I suppose the most significant manifestation of that was the 48-hour continuous campaign in the build-up to polling day. From the Wednesday night till the Friday night, it was just non-stop. I caught the odd snatch of sleep in the Comcar.
How many seats did you do in that 48 period?
I can't remember the exact number, but because it was just a
it was a
blur. But the media were acutely conscious of it, and look, I think it made the point to the general public that this guy's fair income. This guy really means to win. And then, the 2013 campaign, it was the culmination of 3 years of very sustained work on society, on the economy, on security issues. And the famous 3-word slogans were, if you like, the encapsulation of a lot of policy work, scripted speeches and detailed articulation over time of what our fundamental beliefs were. And we distilled that into 4 practical things: scrap the tax, stop the boats, fix the budget and build the roads, because these were all the things that the Labor Party was doing wrong and that we would do so much better. And look, I only had 2 years, but we fundamentally got all those things done.
Can I ask you then to give us an insight into the campaign? So 2010 was an outstanding result. 2013 was an even better result. What were you and the team thinking when the polls in 2010 were not indicating that the result as good as you got. How do you keep the team motivated?
Yeah.
How do you stop people thinking, well, the what if, will I be looking for a job after Saturday? How do you keep going?
Well, you try harder, but of course you've got to try harder based on a formula that you've thought through and which is destined to succeed.
So you're saying you don't really look at the scoreboard when you're playing. You don't look whether you're 10 goals down or 1 point down.
If you are confident that you've got the right pattern of play, you just re-emphasise the pattern of play and do it harder and better in the second half and the final quarter. That's what you do. And I was absolutely confident in 2010 that Labor's emissions obsession, that Labor's climate and energy policies were disastrous, and I think that we've subsequently seen in the Albanese government just how disastrous those policies are. I mean, let me paint this picture for you, John. If the Albanese government is re-elected, as sure as night follows day, this is what's going to happen. Power prices will continue to soar. Electricity reliability will continue to decrease. Our productivity will continue to decline. Our armed forces will continue to weaken. Our society will continue to fracture. There will be big new taxes building on things like the superannuation tax on unrealised capital gains, and there will be far more green burdens on everyone and everything. We all need to understand as voters what we are voting for. We are voting for more of the same if we support the Labor government, and it will be worse a second time round, and much worse if Labor is dependent on the Greens to survive in the Parliament. At one level, I think that the wonder is that Labor is even in the race. They've been such a bad government. I mean, let's face it, what government that has presided over an 8% decline in living standards, 2 successive quarters of declining GDP per head, a household recession, what government
constant broken promises
could even begin to credibly seek re-election? And yes, I'm in the lies. That the worst of them, obviously, the $275 per household per year cut in power prices, a lie. We won't change the stage 3 tax cuts, a lie. We won't.
We're not modelling negative gearing changes.
We won't seek industry-wide bargaining, a lie.
Is this Trump's fault?
What's the saying goes? If he pulls his ear, he's telling the truth. If he scratches his nose, he's telling the truth. But as soon as he moves his lips, then he's lying. I mean, look, is it Trump's fault? I think there are a couple of factors at work here. I think one big factor is just the brazen deceptions that are the stock in trade of this Labor campaign. The constant talk.
Are you saying that implies that for the public, the lies and the untruths are baked in, are priced in, and so when there's another untruth, when there's another fib, when he says, I didn't fall off the stage, and he did, that the public now just don't take account of it, that it just washes over the public because we're all so cynical?
I think a disengaged public. I think that's the thing. A disengaged public should be inured to self-serving deceptions from the Labor Party, the third or fourth iteration of the Medicare scare, for instance. But people are so disengaged that it's like they're hearing these scares for the first time. But they are absolutely brazen. I mean, this idea that Peter Dutton will cut Medicare, if anyone has presided over problems with Medicare, it's Anthony Albanese. I mean, bulk billing rates are 10 percentage points lower now than they were at the beginning of 2022. So Peter Dutton has matched and indeed added to the Medicare spend. Peter Dutton did not cut health funding. Yes, in the final out year of the 2014 budget, there was a lesser increase.
There was a slightly lower increase.
A lesser increase.
That is not a cut.
Which I'd been absolutely upfront about in the campaign. So look, there's these brazen lies about cuts. There are...
And I took you away from Trump.
Complete fabrications about the cost of the nuclear program, which even the highly partisan Smart Energy Council said began at $116 billion, but they then puffed it out to $600 billion based on entirely speculative blowouts. I was listening to my free Spotify over the weekend, and every second ad was an ACTU Teachers Federation ad claiming that free TAFE would end if Dutton got elected. Now, I mean, these are total fantasies, but Labor plainly is playing to what it thinks is a public mindset. Now,
and Labor goes Trump a lot.
We'll get on to Trump in a second, John, but let me just make this point. If government spending is cut, that doesn't mean that money disappears into the ether. If government spending is cut, that means that government spends less of our money. We keep more of it because every dollar that government spends is a dollar that we have to provide. We, the taxpayers, provide every single dollar that government spends, either in taxes today or in taxes tomorrow to repay the debt.
Can I suggest to you, Conservatives have stopped making this argument. You used to make it, Costello used to make it, Howard used to make it. Why is this argument? I would argue this argument isn't being made. Why isn't it? Have Conservatives and Liberal Party and the centre-right more broadly conceded too much to the zeitgeist of more public spending without making the point that a dollar spent by the government is a dollar you don't have?
I certainly think that successful Conservative oppositions and governments have been absolutely consistent on this point, that a government which lives beyond its means, like a household or a business, is in big long-term trouble. And a government that consistently lives beyond its means, which runs consistent debt and deficit, is guilty of intergenerational theft. I mean, our children and grandchildren will be paying the credit card bills that we, this generation, are racking up courtesy of the Albanese government, and I just think that's wrong. So I think there has been a failure to communicate the basic facts of fiscal life to the public. I think there is a Trump factor at work. Trump sucks the oxygen out of our public debate.
The world's public debate.
because there's, on the one hand, Trump fascination syndrome from his supporters, and on the other hand, Trump derangement syndrome from his opponents. He's become the left's favourite monster because they can liken everyone on the domestic political scene who they oppose to Trump. And look, I think in terms of domestic policy, Trump has done a lot of good already, but there's no doubt that his tariff measures are hugely disruptive. The uncertainty that he's injected into alliance guarantees, again, hugely disruptive. And the assault on Canada, a rhetorical assault, in some respects not that different from Putin's pre-2022 rhetorical assault on Ukraine. The rhetorical assault has been completely and utterly counterproductive. And then I suppose the final factor at work here, John, is just how robust and resilient are we as a people? Paul Kelly has been making this point. The current rather shallow election debate, the current rather, I suppose, indulgent policy positions, in a sense, reflect the respective political leadership's assessment of where the voting public is. It's an old expression. In a democracy, the people get the governments they deserve. And maybe it's a hangover from the pandemic, which in turn was perhaps a hangover from the GFC. I mean, look at the way we handled the GFC. It was essentially a crisis brought on by a surfeit of debt and deficit. And yet, instead of cutting debt and deficit, we actually indulged in more debt and deficit. Then, of course, the pandemic. Well, instead of following the pandemic plans that had been carefully prepared over a couple of decades at least, basically everyone in panic dropped those plans and adopted the Wuhan plan, which was lock everyone up, or in Australia's case, encourage everyone to hide under the doona for 2 years, and don't worry because the government will make it okay. It will spend whatever is needed, and if you're out of pocket, well, we'll fill your pockets with cash. I mean, I can remember my nephews who had part-time jobs in a local restaurant, earning a couple of $100 a week. They were suddenly on $750 a fortnight for doing nothing. Wonderful, but completely unsustainable and bad in principle. I mean, the something for nothing mindset, the world owes me a living mindset, which has become much more prevalent today. It is utterly, utterly destructive, and it's got to change.
What changes that mindset?
Well, if nothing else changes the mindset, really hard times will change the mindset. As the Blessed Margaret Thatcher once said, the facts are conservative, and there is no doubt we will see through the climate cult when the lights start going out. Likewise, there is no doubt that we will see through the welfare mindset when tax rates become absolutely usurious. But just for the moment, there's this pretense, which I guess is being nourished by the polity generally, and this illusion, which is being cherished by the public at large, that somehow nothing needs to change, somehow we can go on as we are, taxing and spending, sleepwalking through Lotus Land, ignoring the challenges to our economic strength, the challenges to our social cohesion, the challenges to our long-term strategic security, indeed our short-term strategic security. At some point, it will all come crashing down, and I would very much hope that we get a government on Saturday week that is at least conscious of these things and is determined to do something about them before it's too late.
Can I ask you about the strategic environment? And one of the issues of the last few days of the campaign has been a Russian airbase in Indonesia. Allegedly, the government refuses to answer questions about it. The media don't seem particularly interested in it, other than writing that the government won't answer questions about it. Can you give us a little bit of a background to the issues and what you think is happening in that space?
Well, it's true that Indonesia has a long-standing principle of non-alignment, and the idea that the Indonesians would formally grant some kind of sovereign base to anyone is implausible. But there are all sorts of ways of dressing up a base. For instance, we have in this country joint facilities with the United States. They're not bases as such, but they're incredibly important and useful to the Americans, and they serve, I think, an important stabilising role in our region. The Russians have flown aircraft out of Indonesian bases in the past, most notably in 2017. And what does seem to be an absolute fact is discussions between the Russians and the Indonesians for some kind of joint space facility in West Papua.
To most Australians, this would be news. This would be astounding. This would be unknown.
But again, what we need to understand is that while Russia has an almost non-existent economic relationship and a non-existent geographic and cultural relationship with Indonesia, it has long had, if you like, a military procurement relationship with Indonesia. Back in the 1960s, there was a big deal between the then Sukarno government and Russia, whereby Russia essentially equipped the Indonesian Navy and Air Force. Now, still, as I understand it, most of the Indonesian aircraft, military aircraft, are Russian, and much of the Navy is of Russian origin. So there is a strong pre-existing link with the Russians, and the President Prabowo, the new president, speedily signed up Indonesia to this BRICS grouping, which is essentially an attempt by Russia and China to create, if you like, an outsiders club to challenge what they think is the insiders club of the G7 and NATO. I see this Russian involvement in military and other technological areas with Indonesia as yet a further factor in the growing instability and the growing, I suppose, tilt against the West, which is pronounced in our region. Yes, there's this Russian work with Indonesia, but look at the way China is deliberately setting out to suborn the governments of our Pacific neighbours, deliberately seeking military bases in the South Pacific, and appears to be finding some takers. I mean, the Cook Islands have just entered into some kind of a relationship with Communist China. The Solomon Islands have been playing footsie with Communist China. I think the PNG leadership appreciates that Australia really is their partner of choice, but there's also little doubt that if someone is offering them goodies with no immediate strings attached, they'll probably take them.
Can I ask you, is the media in Australia letting the public down? Well, they're letting the public down in many regards, but in relation to this discussion about security. So there is a conversation about China, but we've been talking about Indonesia, we've been talking about PNG. Very little of this seems to be on the public platform. I mean, why isn't there a debate between Penny Wong and David Coleman?
Why hasn't there been a defence minister's debate?
Yes.
Workplace relations minister's debate, an education minister's debate. I mean, we've had a leaders' debate. We've had several leaders' debates. We've had a treasurer's debate. We've had a energy minister's debate. But why shouldn't we have had debates across the board?
What do you think has happened?
Look, there's no doubt that there are some outstanding voices in the media. We talked about Paul Kelly earlier.
Peter Jennings has been doing wonderful work with the IPA.
Who's our best strategic commentator. There are very good voices in the media, but the debate inevitably focuses on the urgent and not the important. It focuses on today's alarum and excursion, not on the long-term developments which need to be appreciated and tackled, and whether it's our economic stagnation, our social fracturing, our strategic isolation. We really need to focus on these big picture problems rather than on
Trump, or whether
the Canadians have allowed Vegemite into a cafe.
That's right, yeah. What needs to happen in the next 10, 11 days till polling day for Australians to come to what I believe would be the right decision on election day?
Well, John, I think we've got to focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are that our country is drifting backwards, and it will drift backwards further, faster under the current government if it's re-elected. The fundamentals are that we are substantially worse off than we were 3 years ago. The government, the Albanese government, has made it much worse with its policies on climate, on unions. Its Big Australia agenda is doing enormous damage at many, many different levels. So the first thing, I think, is to turf out this bad government, and then we need to, I think, do our best to ensure that a successor coalition government is the best possible government. And I guess that's what the IPA are trying to do, and in their own educative way. And that's what I guess people who owe the Liberal Party a very great deal, as I do, are trying to do.
Tony Abbott, thank you for being with us on Australia's Future.
Thanks, John.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.